Today we're going to be going over what I refer to as NASA grade wiring. This is wiring the way that I do it. I don't prefer to do it the other ways. I'm not really a big fan of it. One simple way of doing the wiring that a lot of people do is they'll get the wire, they strip it back quite a bit, and then they twist the two wires together. Now, this does make a very good connection as long as you use pliers to help do the final rotate and pass on it, whatnot. But it's really bulgy. It sticks out just like this right here. I'm not a huge fan of that. I don't like the way it's bulgy. It's hard to wrap it up with other wires sometimes, or sometimes fitting it up into the location where you need it to. So we're definitely not going to use that. There's the spade connector, which is not too big of a deal. I didn't even actually hook these wires up to this. I just crimped the rubber or the plastic part in here and heat shrink it, just to kind of give you the idea of the spade connector. But anyways, usually if I'm going to use the spade connector, I like to solder in that little spot right there before I try and do any heat shrink or anything like that on there. One nice thing about the heat shrink is that if you're doing this type of plug and you have it open, you can slide a sleeve over it that's big enough, and this will help you to better protect your connection. And then that way you don't have that. Now the metal can't touch anything else and make contact with other things. I still don't really suggest that too much. If it's going to be a solid wire connection, what I prefer to do is I prefer to slide the wires in together. Here, let me turn on this, my Mega Light. I prefer to slide the wires in together like this and give it a slight little twist. Kind of like this, and then I solder it together, and that helps to make it so it's not so bulgy like this piece is. When you're going to do this, it really helps out a lot too. Grab this metal plate here because we're gonna heat up some solder here. So we have our wire right here twisted directly together. Now, typically when these wires are connected still to other things, what I do is a pre-twist on it, try and stuff together, then I twist it and try and keep it all together. Once you get that done, always throw on solder, rosin core, something that's already got the solder already kind of with a flux already built into it. Now, right here, it doesn't really matter too much if you melt the wires a little bit. Try not to touch it too fast right after. Solder does actually harden fairly quick, so that's kind of nice. I just try and make sure that my solder looks mostly smooth and that you got good connection all the way around. So that looks good. So usually when I do this, what I do is I throw heat shrink on there, which is not too bad. Which is not too bad, but you can still see it's kind of lumpy a little bit. And it's not a big deal, and that does work perfectly fine. It's pretty watertight, pretty airtight in there, which will still definitely work. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you my version of the NASA grade wiring. So if you got the wires together like this, you'll pre-twist them slightly, the opposite directions of each other. Try and get the wires to go into the other side, and then twist it back. And then I'll usually roll the wire in between my two fingers. It'll sometimes help the wire to be more tight when you go to solder. Now this is the part right here where we do the NASA grade wiring, because using heat shrink on there alone will do an excellent job, and hold it nice and tight, but like I said, it is still kind of a little bit lumpy. It's not as smooth and nice as it could be. So my trick here is the liquid electric tape. You don't need a bunch of this when you're doing a small piece of wire. You literally want like a little bit. You don't need it to go wrap around the world right here. Essentially all you're trying to do is just fill in the gap in between here, in between the bare wire and the outside of the wire skin. So if you have it built up too much, what will happen is it'll give you problems when you're trying to slide the wire casing or the heat shrink casing over it. So try and keep it to a bare minimum. You don't want it to be super thick or anything. Now what I'll do is, these are free wires. Typically I would just slide the heat shrink over the wire. But what you want to try and do is you want to try and slip it in there without it touching the sides. This stuff is extremely flammable, the liquid electric tape. So it will catch on fire pretty quick. So at this point what I do is I heat the end of it, and then I heat the other end of it. And this kind of gives like a little pocket of where that stuff is going to be at. Now this is when I start heat shrinking that. Down nice and tight. Now what you have here is you have a nice smooth connection. The liquid electric tape helps to fill in any of the gaps. It also helps to waterproof it even more. Also it helps to keep it more out of the air and stuff like that. So 100%, if you could do it with just the regular wiring, and it turned out good, that already protects it with the heat shrink from air and also from water. I feel like doing it this way protects it even more from air and water, and you can see how much smoother the wire actually looks itself too. So if you were laying these two together, you probably wouldn't think there's much of a difference, except for certain spots. But you could definitely tell that this wire right here has the best and smoothest look to it, without hardly any too much of a gap or distance on it. Like I said, this will work perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with just doing heat shrink on it and twisting the wires together. But you can see how much nicer of a connection, that is than that, or that is than that. And that's pretty much this right here, but I just threw heat shrink around. Like I said, that will work, but I don't suggest it. I really like the way that I do it, the way that I call the NASA grade wiring. It really does give it the smoothest, best look, and like I said, the diameter of it's pretty much all the same running through it. There's still slight imperfections in it, but it's not too big of a deal.